Hello, everyone. Surprise! Welcome back to Universal Journeys with your hosts, Brenda L. Bates and myself, Donny Winter. It's hard to believe that it's been almost 8 years, right? Follow your heart, for only you know which path is right for you. I don't know if you forgot that, but that's our motto here. So follow your heart, for only you know which path is right for you. Our show is about redefining ourselves to match the soul's purpose by illuminating the threads which intertwine creativity, spirituality, and identity. And these threads encourage, empower, and enlighten us on our own respective journeys. Getting a little tongue tied already. It wouldn't be the same if I didn't get tongue tied, right?
Yeah, me too. See, there you go.
No, I remember when we used to do it, you would be like, this is annoying. 'Cause it was kind of a tongue twister originally. So,
It was.
Brenda, I've missed you. I've missed you a
I have
lot.
missed you too. I have missed you too. I miss doing this and getting out there and speaking with people. I mean, your life takes you in a different path or a different direction for a little while, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, I'm missing this. I'm missing
Right,
something, and
right.
this is one of those things.
I was missing this too. Like, I feel like we had some really good conversations. It's not, by the way, everybody, it's not as though Brenda and I have not seen each other in 8 years. We've seen each other many times in that time span. But since we've sat down and done this creative outlet together, like it's been nearly 8 years. So I guess what if like why did we end up ending Universal Journeys on its original run, and where has life taken us since? So, well, my understand like so when we I think we ended Universal Journeys simply because we were too busy. Um we were doing an episode every week, 2 hours, 2 hours on a Sunday night. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of
It is
time.
a lot of time. It is a
And
lot of time, and I think,
yeah.
excuse me, I think part of that was because we had other commitments that we had to do at that particular time as well. And so it was either do what was required, which was once a week, 2 hours during that particular day, each day that we did it. That became a little overwhelming.
Well, and I think it became so big too because we had guests on all the time. We were doing readings. Readings can be kind of exhausting to do regularly also. And I think just toward the end we got a little burnt out. So
Mhm.
now that we've kind of streamlined it a little bit more, now that technology has advanced since 2016, I think that we are in a better place to be doing this. And we'll later on we'll be talking about how frequently this will be happening. But um I guess the next big question would be where, I mean, 8 years is a long time. Where has life taken us since then? What have you been up to? What have you been up to, Brenda? What have you been doing?
Well, well, I've been here, there, and everywhere else. Number one is after we let Universal Journeys go. Um, there was some life-changing events for me. I switched positions or jobs and stuff like that in um, several times, and during that process, I had more responsibility. So that took me away from my spirituality, and that's something I really do miss. That was my passion, and sometimes when you lose your passion, it's hard to get back to it.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you're in a regular job where you have your 9 to 5 per se, and then more responsibility, by the time you get home, you're really, really tired.
Yeah.
However, during that process, I was able to purchase a house. It'll be 5 years, coming up on 5 years in April of this year. And as you can see from the background, this is part of my house, um, and I'm loving it. So there are reasons why I had to, do what I had to do or guided to do what I did, because that was my main goal was to get my own house in my own name and, no one else saying, "Hey, that's my house," you know?
Mhm.
But that's kinda where that's gone, and again, my spirituality went on the, back burner per se.
Mhm.
Also during that time, I did get into several different businesses, and I was into doing my FYH creative design, which had to do with decals and window decals and car decals and things like that and banners. And then I kind of switched over into doing sublimation um, on cards. I did cards. I also did plates and plaques and cups and mugs and
Mhm.
a little bit of T-shirts and stuff like that. So, but I still sort of kind of do that stuff, but it wasn't really fulfilling what I needed spiritually because I
Mhm.
just dropped everything to make the almighty dollar, and that's not always necessarily the way to be. Um,
Well, that's
so
how it always goes, isn't it? Like,
it is.
as creators, because I would say that we're definitely creative souls, right? Like,
Right.
when what we create doesn't always sync up with the commercialization of everything, like, we quickly get discouraged. We're just like, "What's the point of it then?" Right?
Mhm.
And I think because having navigated the pandemic, right, I feel like we probably both learned during the pandemic the importance of our creative outlets, right? Because I know we actually started talking about doing this because we did some like video chats throughout 2020. I remember us talking a little bit about doing this again because we were
Right.
like, we kind of need this. Like, we really miss this. Um, if anything, just to sit down and be able to talk and chat and, talk about interesting topics like that. I mean, that was something significant to us, I think, right? Um, so, I mean, my prior 8 years, oh my goodness. I, toward the end of the last set of episodes we did, I was finishing up my master's degree. So I finished that and I started teaching at a community college. So that's been happening over the past few years. I also have bought a house.
Yes, you
Um,
did.
which is kind of surreal, and yet this being my office, it feels really good. Like, I really resonated with what you said about, like, owning your own space, like, that, for me, has been very crucial in helping me, you know, maintain my creative outputs and stuff like that, 'cause, in the past 5 years, 5 years, 8 years, I've had a couple of books that got published, and I got engaged as well, so a lot's been happening, and sometimes I have to pinch myself to be like, Are the last 8 years real? Like, did these things really happen in this arguably short span of time or not?" But they are, so.
I've been totally amazed with what you've accomplished the last 8 years. I mean, like you said, you have books in that you authored, and you have podcasts. I'm going to say podcast, but YouTube channel, things that you have been very busy. I mean, seriously, very busy. To look at what you've come through and done and accomplished compared to me, it's like hands down, you got me
I
by
mean,
a
that's
lot.
it kind of in our nature as a Taurus and a Capricorn, right? Like,
That's
what
yes.
are our successes? Well, like, I think for you, carving out independence was a huge thing that you wanted to work toward, right? And the thing is,
Absolutely.
like, the act of doing it is one thing, but then you also, and successfully, I might add, have been sustaining it. Like, independence, like, sustaining it is almost as important as the act of actually taking that first step, right? So, I would argue that that success itself is as important as anything that I've done. So.
Now, the other thing too is my creative abilities actually went into my rose garden. Doing my rose garden, putting up little areas to put the roses in, putting a fence up, and doing different things within the house itself or with the house itself, house and property. So I guess my creativity was just directed in a different avenue or way, and
Yeah.
it still produced some beautiful pictures.
Oh god, I am obsessed with your rose garden and your yard in general. You know what's really funny, Brenda? I remember a time a decade ago where you were like, "I don't have a green thumb." Like, I don't like
I remember that.
I'm not really good at gardening, and now here you are being like a master gardener, and it's been phenomenal to watch, and I've been really happy to watch the space that you've created, how watch it transform into what it is now, right?
Yeah,
And I think since I've finally gotten a house, like, I've learned to look at your experience and, like, just find so much meaning in what you've done with your space, so,
thanks. I
yeah.
mean, you have to make it yours, and, sometimes it's funny, sometimes you complain because you don't like something that's in the house or whatever, and then you don't do anything about it just because you have to maintain that every day, your routine, and all of a sudden something comes out, God says, "Okay, it's ti" it's like, "Okay, it's time," and, he creates events that you have to change what you didn't like. So I'm just saying, beware of what you put out there because you may not you may not mean to want something to happen quite as quickly as I did, but I just had to redo my whole kitchen.
Mhm.
But you know something? I love how it turned out.
Oh, it
Uh,
like, the
so
pictures are wonderful, but I know that you were very you were very annoyed and stressed out about it too. You were just
oh,
like, "Are you kidding me right now?"
right, right,
I
right.
I guess
And
that's
and
one
it
of the
wasn't
woes
just
of homeownership.
well, when it initially happened, I'm like, really? But really what got me was and it taught me patience, was working with contractors and stuff like that had to do certain jobs within it and did it incorrectly and extended it out, a 2-day job for both the plumber and my contractor, ended up being a whole week, and one incident after the other with my plumbers, and that just kind of drove me a little crazy. And, sometimes you have to sit down and have a little bit of a cry, and that's what I did.
Oh, been there, done that. Been been there, done that.
So, home ownership isn't always what it's cracked up to be, but you still can, it's your home. It's something you do. You
Mhm.
have to look at the brighter side and say, it's better than what it was by far.
Well, your home is I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on this topic, and I think we have in one of the older episodes about creating your space, right? But, like,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yep.
space that you create is an extension of who you are. So, like, that's why it can be so jarring when something happens to it. It's just like, "Ah," But then after it's fixed, you're just like, "Okay, I'm putting my love into it. It's gonna work out. It'll be fine. It might be expensive, but it'll be fine." Um,
Right.
you know, but so one thing that I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about is the history of this show, like, just a general history, because, like, I remember, was it back in 2015, you asked me to you were like, "Donnie, do you wanna be a co-host at Universal Journeys Radio?" Which used to be on, a network on Blog Talk Radio, called Mystical Awakenings, right? Wonderful network, had a lot of really great shows. I don't know if they're still active or not.
They are actually, but I don't know if they're on Blog Talk. I think they switched.
Right, right. I mean, it's interesting because Blog Talk Radio was, like, kind of like the first major segue into, like, what podcasting has turned into these days, right? Which is kinda cool, but
Mhm.
no, so you asked me to do this, and like, at that time, I was just like, "Ooh, how unexpected. I don't know what's gonna happen," you know? But it kind of just turned into us having our conversations like we would, like, sitting at a coffee shop. Let's talk about, like, our history as friends, because obviously what Universal Journeys has turned into has kind of become an extension of us, I would say.
It is.
Um, I think we first met. I was a barista, and you were working in administration at a retail establishment that we were at. And at first, like, we didn't have many conversations the first year or so, but then, like, we sat down and started really delving in and having conversations and getting to know each other.
Mhm.
And it kind of went on from there. Was there anything notable that you can remember from any of that that was, like, interesting?
Well, part of it was, number 1, I love coffee, and I love gourmet coffee. So, it was a hangout, and when you hang out at a place long enough, you get to know the people who work behind the counter. Not only did I get to know you, but I got to know other people too, the
Yeah.
owners and some of the customers and stuff like that. So I remember when I first met you, if I'm not mistaken, were still in high school, and
I
you were
I
you
was
were
in
getting
college at the time,
was it college? I
although
thought it
I
was
looked
high
young and
school.
youthful.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. So it was just I think it was just you had just started college or something like
Mhm,
that, and, so that always intrigued me because I when I'm around young people, I always like to encourage them to go to college, to do something different, to get out of their regular um, norm places, like a small town where you grew up in and stuff like that. So I those are things that if you can expand your awareness and you can see what other cultures are like, you have a better idea on how to deal with people. And you
right,
can see that your way isn't necessarily the only way.
mhm. Well, you
And
develop a better respect for everybody around you that way.
you absolutely do. And I always encourage that. I mean, when I was 19, I was working on a farm. I grew up on a farm. I was working on a farm. And I thought that the only way that I was able to get out and away from here to explore and to find out who I really was to go into the service. So I was in the military for 8 years and, that that took me into different cultures and different countries and stuff like that. So that helped me develop, along with education and stuff like that. So my thought was if I could do that myself, why not encourage young people to do the same thing? Because that's the only way that you're really going to learn more about what the world is all about.
Right. I mean, that's excellently said, and I think it was what, like 2008 or something when we first met. It was a long time ago,
Mm,
and I was young in college. I very much was a drastically different person than I am now. Like, there are some things that are very much the same, but I was very shy. I was very insecure about everything. And I remember that you were one of the first people who were like really, really encouraging of like, Donnie, be creative. Donnie, go do this. Donnie, don't be afraid to meet people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And that felt really good because at that time, having just come out of the closet, and everything like that, it was a very vulnerable time, and you were a crucial ally then and still to this day. So, like, I think that friendship definitely started in a sort of like mentorship type of situation, which I really appreciated and still do.
Well, you're welcome, and the thing is I listened to your struggles, as you were coming out and stuff like that, and I don't have any of those prejudices with that. So, and other people do, and that's unfortunate because we're all human beings. We all are loved by God, and so why do what we do and have all the prejudices that what we do?
Right, yeah.
But I also wanted to show you during that time my support for who you are as an individual. I
Mhm.
didn't care what if you were male, female, or whatever. I didn't care,
Mhm.
you know.
Absolutely. And so, like, thinking of the context of where we were both in a very small town. I was coming
Mhm.
home from a university town to work at a coffee shop on the weekends. So like it was kind of culturally jarring to go from like a place that was accepting back to a place that had been universally not accepting, right? So like that's why I especially gravitated to individuals like you, because like you kind of you made that already divisive space much more accepting, you know, and in very simple straightforward ways, like whether it was like just listening or being encouraging, it did a lot. Let's just say. But no, I think okay, so Universal Journeys technically started before I even became involved. And it how what year did it start? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I'm thinking it actually started in 2014. There was a group that I used to belong to, and they were just getting started. That's where I actually started the Universal Journeys, was on that network.
Mhm.
And then from there, I had what, I think I had another co-host prior to your Christine, and then she had some things that she had to do, so I had to scramble and say, "Okay, I need another co-host." And, that by that time, you and I were actually, um, in comparison, almost the same thought pattern of with spirituality. We
Mhm.
had our differences. Well, everyone does, but I still needed and wanted you on my show as a co-host. And
Yeah.
we did a really great thing together. And that's one of that's why you miss people,
Mhm.
because when you connect like we've connected, and all the things that we've experienced together on something like this is why you want to kind of rekindle stuff, you know
Yeah.
revitalize it.
Revitalize it, absolutely. Oh, and so no, I remember being so excited when you reached out to me about that. I was just like, "Absolutely, let's do it." And we managed to make it work for what, 40 some like 40 episodes or so.
Right.
I at the time, like I was living in Missouri doing my master's program, and we managed to coordinate it um through Blog Talk Radio, right? And then eventually we decided to expand into YouTube. But in 2016, that's when we were like, life is getting really busy. But you know, when something is really good, I think we kind of find out that life brings us back to certain things, right?
It does. I mean, the topics that we talked about in Universal Journeys was totally amazing, and at the particular time they were all spot on. I mean, we had controversial aspects and talks, and then we have spirituality, and
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of different things.
art, music, like bully. We had an episode where we talked about like the significance of bullying and why it's bad,
Mhm.
and you know all of that jazz. Like we covered so much ground. I mean, I think individually, and what brings me back to this one is any excuse to hang out with you is an excuse. It's a like sign me up. But also I think that we've grown a lot as people in the past 8 years. Like, how do you feel like you've grown in the past 8 years?
Oh, exponentially. Um, and for me, it wasn't necessarily in the avenue that I wanted to go to into, per se, because it took me away from my spirituality, and my spirituality is my passion. Now it's my time to get back into it, and it's a little uh, um, challenging. It's a little challenging, because everything that I once knew and what I did is no longer valid. And it's funny because even though it took me away from my spirituality, it also changed my spirituality. So it was still continuing to develop, but it's totally different now.
Yeah,
So, and
that's
it's got, okay,
interesting.
now I got to find some normalcy, and it isn't always to the point to where everything is like happy, glorious, and all my accomplishments were great, and you know, um with not having spirituality, um, as the main focus in my life, I did have a lot of doom and gloom and things like that. I got caught up in the everyday living, that people get caught up in, you know? I mean,
Mhm.
I was in a depressed state for a while. My anxiety level was off, off the
Mhm.
roof, and it was a lesson. It was a lesson. Um, so I'm working at coming back, not necessarily coming back, being better. How's that?
Well, that's why this episode's titled "There and Back Again." Of course, it's a reference to The Hobbit. But no, like,
Yeah,
sometimes
absolutely.
the journeys that we go on are unexpected.
Mhm.
Sometimes they might not render the results that we want, and it kind of might bring us back to, like, the same space or the same spot to kind of, like, reassess, or to at least develop an appreciation of, like, the things that we have done, um, that we may not be aware of, right? Um, because, like, I personally, looking at all of your accomplishments, like, I think that you've done a lot in the past several years that are very notable. I feel like you've I feel like you've developed a different type of confidence that you didn't have before as well.
That's true.
Um, and maybe that confidence does come from being in those vulnerable states, right? Because we kind of learn about ourselves too in those types of moments. We don't necessarily want to, those, they may not feel good, right? But we do kind of learn about ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you're right. Sometimes we don't like to learn what we need to learn about ourselves. But when you come on the other end, it's like, whew, I'm glad I got through that. Holy smokes.
It's like running a
But
marathon, right?
it is, and you do learn a lot. And so you take those bits and pieces that you learn and that you want to keep, and you put it into your repertoire of things that you want to go forward with.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and you're stronger. You're stronger for it.
I feel like, and over the past 8 years, like, for me, I already mentioned that I used to be like a very, very insecure human being, and it's not to say that I still don't have insecurities. Like, I still navigate it. I am thankfully 3.5 years into therapy. That's been helping me astronomically. I discovered that I have bipolar disorder. That's been something fun to navigate, but discovering that
Mhm.
helped me develop an understanding of, like, why my mind has worked the way it has over the years through looking at, like, these different processes, right? But I feel like when it comes to self growth, like, developing that confidence that I didn't have before, I think has done a lot for me that I did not really expect. And I used to beat myself up over it because I used to think to myself, well, it feels so simple now. Like, it feels so simple now to be a confident human being. But at that point in my life, it felt like I was climbing a mountain. It felt like climbing a frozen glacial wasteland mountain, you
Mhm.
know? And now I'm just like, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad.
Well, right, and that's many people experience just exactly what you experienced, and a lot of it has to do with fear. And I am how I don't even know what the word I want to say for that one. I experienced that too. I have experienced that, and I will probably continue to experience it until fear is not an object, you know.
Interesting.
So because fear freezes us from trying to go forward because we're afraid of what might occur during the process. So
Mhm.
we're, going into it kicking and screaming and everything like that. And then when we get through it and we look back on it, I mean, I've done that myself several times. I'm like, that wasn't really so bad. What the heck was
It's interesting
why
that
was I
you
so emotional?
It's interesting that you mentioned that, and I think it's like, fear is one of those, like, really primal emotions that, like, when we experience it, we just kind of have, like, tunnel vision, right? Or I kind of think of my brain as like a hamster wheel, and there's, like, a little hamster just going shoo, 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 you know? And,
Yes,
I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but that's the best I got.
that was good.
But,
That was good.
um No, like, I think once I developed the ability to ask myself why I was being so fearful, that made it easier for me. Because
Mhm.
when I got to the point where I could be like, okay, why am I experiencing this fear? And then I could answer it with like, okay, afraid because of these reasons. Okay. So what is the whole purpose of that, right? And the truth is, fear, genetically speaking, all the way down to our DNA, is a safety mechanism to keep us safe when you think about it, right? So we have to ask the question of like, is this a situation in which I'm unsafe? If not, then okay, maybe then I can move forward, right? Like, I'm still safe. I'm just doing something different, or following a different process, or making a change, or adjusting something in my life.
Right, and part of the fear is past experiences. Our past experiences have a lot to do with our present fear because our mind, our body, our cells, and everything else remembers what happened prior to, and we fear going back through those incidences.
Yeah.
So that is what, is habilitating to us. So we can't we have a hard time pushing through. But when we do push through, the light just like whoo, you made
Yeah.
it. You
And
made it.
it's so relieving too. No, I think that's an excellent point. I think at the end of the day, one thing that we also tend to struggle with is when we do experience that fear, we tend to beat ourselves up over it too. Like, I know, like, for me, like, I've almost caused more harm to myself being shameful over being afraid of a change than actually going through the actual change, right?
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
finding a way to just be like, okay, like, I'm not ashamed to be afraid of this thing. I'm not ashamed to have a human emotional response to something, because let's be honest, in the society that we live in, people are very quick to be like, you're being over dramatic, you're being ridiculous, it's human to react. It's
It
okay
is.
to react. It's how we bounce back from it,
Mhm.
or how we apply something, that really matters. That was probably like, I started therapy during the pandemic. Probably the best decision I've ever made. That was the most challenging thing for me though, was like, I could hear information from people, like advice on like how to navigate things, but would I apply it, right?
Right.
So, like, therapy at first kind of served as like just a trauma dump space for me to be like, well, these insecurities, my life, do people hate me, blah, And then once I started getting tools to work with, then I was like, I'm applying stuff. I'm learning. Like, I'm taking this insecurity, I'm tossing it into a stew and making something different with it. I'm full of really horrible analogies today, everybody. Bear with me.
But that's okay because during the pandemic is where my anxiety and my PTSD reared its ugly head. And I went through counseling too. It actually started in 2016, my counseling, and then it just kind of didn't escalate, but um, definitely there was some things that were going on with people wearing masks, especially guys with beards and some of the crazy things that they said and did and stuff like that. So
Mm,
I understand. And sometimes it takes someone with a different perspective than what you have to make that light bulb come on. It's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. You're right,
mhm.
type of deal. And obviously it sounds like that's what you had as well. And it's what I needed. It
Yeah.
was to see a different perspective and to be able to talk it out.
Well,
And we both had that.
right. And people like us, again, Taurus and a Capricorn here, we are very hesitant to depend on other people emotionally, especially because we
Right.
pride ourselves on our independence, on our own inner fortitude. So I think, I mean, one, us making the decision to have therapy was important, right? Because, like, that's a big decision to make for people like us who kind of get caught up in our own ability to navigate things. But I think therapy also prevents us from worrying about burdening other people in our circles, right? Um,
Mhm.
because that, like, I know for me, like, that was always like the big thing. Like, I would always worry about, like, well, I don't want to tell everybody about my problems because I don't want to burden the people in my life with them, even though they would be more than willing to listen to me, right? But like having that outside perspective, who's getting paid to do that, made it a little
Right.
bit easier to be like, okay, here is my entire history. Let's unpack this.
Mine was about, weakness, showing weakness. Not only just showing weakness, as number 1 is being a woman, and number 2 is being a former, veteran. So, that was just a form of weakness, because, when you talk to your counselors and stuff like that, or your therapist, then you have the tendency to break down
Yeah,
and show weaknesses and stuff like that. I didn't want to show that to family members or friends or anything like that. And you're right, I didn't want to burden them either. But on the same side of that is I didn't want them going out and telling everyone else about my weaknesses.
right. Well,
So
yeah,
it
because
was
it's
safe.
such a
It's safe.
vulnerable act, right? Like, it's such a
Hmm.
vulnerable act to be able to come to somebody and be like, here is the root, like a deep root of something that's really getting to me. I actually I have a similar fear too of people kind of like, and I remember this from my own past. Like, I would have people that I would go to in confidence who would kind of like weaponize, whatever it was that I came to them with.
Hmm.
And then it turned in, and then it just made me not really trust people, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, so no, I think that's important. That's like, and I'm glad that you've also felt like some fulfillment through therapy as well. Just another part of our journey, right?
Absolutely. And it's like through all that process, that 8-year process, a lot of things have changed, you know.
Yeah.
And as much as I've mentioned that my spirituality took a back seat, it still was very important to me. I still did the things that I needed to do, every morning and say, thank you, Lord, for, all of this stuff and putting people into my lives and, giving me this and letting me do that and, giving me courage to go forward in what I needed to do. Don't get me wrong, I still have my days.
Mhm. Yeah, me too. But it didn't cease to exist for you. Like, it may have been on a back burner, but it was still present. So that's important. That's important, right?
Yep.
So interesting question. In your opinion, what has been your biggest learning experience in the past 8 years?
My biggest learning experience was there's a couple, but one is to know thyself. I really did get to know myself much better than I had before. And I say that way is because from a very young age, I was a people pleaser. So I lost who I was. Even through all the times from way back when up to this point, um, not this point, I would say several years ago when I first got my house is when I really started to really know who I was and grow into it. Um, and the person I am today, anyways. But people pleasing, you lose yourself. You don't realize how much you do lose yourself because when you lose, say, like a partner or a friend or a job or whatever, you cannot identify. You have nothing to identify to.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like, okay, who am I now? What do I do? How do I do this? You know, just like I just recently retired, and it's like, oh, I don't have any routine. I don't have anybody to, help, you know, build or guide or any of that stuff. And it's a big change and you have to reinvent yourself. It's like, okay, who do I want to be now or what do I want to be? And then you try to find your authentic self. And that's really, if you can find that and keep that authenticity of yourself, you're going to be much better off when you do lose loved ones via divorce or death or whatever. Um,
Or have
so
major life changes like retirement or a shift in whatever you choose to do, yeah.
right, right. Right, because you can't identify with anything else. So if you're authentically you, if you learn how to be authentically you, then you don't have to worry about when these things occur because you are who you are.
Yeah. I love that. That's so good. That is so good. Uh, I think for me, my biggest learning experience, I mean, I could provide a list of learning experiences,
Yeah,
but
me
the
too.
biggest learning experience for me, based on my history and my insecurities, has been that I deserve to exist in the spaces I inhabit. And that's something that therapy helped me learn because I had several sessions, and my therapist was like, "You really like minimizing and erasing yourself in any way possible, don't you, Donnie?" And I'm like, "What?" It was true. Like, I think, like, having to navigate bullying for so long, and all of that, like, I got very used to making myself as small as possible in any space that I was in, to either not
Mhm,
draw attention to myself, to keep myself safe, or to just not make a big deal out of being present in any way, right? But once I discovered that it's okay to exist in the spaces that you inhabit, it was a game changer for me. It's not that I still don't, I mean, I still have moments where I struggle with it. I think if you have like a history of trauma or anything like that, like there are things that will linger with you the rest of your life that
mhm.
you just have to be vigilant about navigating it as it arises, right? But I feel like for me, I've gotten much more confident about, like, not just staying quiet all the time in every situation. That used to be a big thing for me. I would show up to a
Me too.
situation and I would just be this, like, little meek and quiet little ant, like, on the floor in the far corner, hoping to not be seen and squished by anybody. Um, Another analogy. But anyway, uh but I think once I overcame that, it felt like a weight was lifted in some way, because I don't think I quite realized how much bandwidth I allocated to going into a social situation and being like, "Okay, I need to make myself as small as possible so I don't disturb the people around me in any way by simply existing."
And that's true. I mean, especially, I mean, in your position, and then being a woman too is, guys are always like, well, blah 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 blah, you need to do this or that or whatever, and then for me, like just recently, where my kitchen was messed up or stuff, I decided that I wanted this cabinet and that sink and blah 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 blah, and a new microwave and so on and so forth. And my friend says, well, why do you need that? And it's like, because I want it. It's something that I want. So that was a big hurdle right there because before I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe you're right or whatever," and you go with the flow or go with what they say. But you know something? You deserve what you want. You deserve it.
Right.
Don't let somebody else say, "Oh, well, you don't need this," or well, you can use secondhand stuff. And it's like, no, 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 no. No, 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 no. Not
Brenda,
saying that
how
that was
dare you have needs and wants? How dare you?
But that's the thing is
Mhm.
because if you've lived with someone else's expectation and not your own, you have the tendency to do that. Oh, well, I don't really need that, but the thing is when you step into your own power, and that's really what it is, it's like, no, I am not going to settle for anything less than what I want.
Mhm.
Because if I do, then all I'm doing is dreaming. You need to bring that dream into fruition. You need to bring that dream out into reality. And that's exactly what I did. And that's exactly what I will continue to do. So stepping into your power is powerful,
Yeah,
but don't
absolutely.
look back, because a lot of people will step into their power and they'll back up,
Right.
and then they won't go back into their power. So the major thing is to continue to go forward. And as I'm telling everyone else this, I'm telling myself that way too, or that too.
Well, I think that's something, especially people like us who have our unique histories and our struggles, like that's something
Mm.
that we have to be, like I said earlier, vigilant about, right? Because there are, I might have like an off day where like, I'm existing, I'm present, but then somebody might say something the wrong way or not intending it even, and that might
Mhm.
kind of coax you to just take a step back and be like, okay, go back into that shell, go back into that, and then what makes it difficult is knowing like, okay, Donnie, you're doing that again. You're walling yourself off again.
Yes.
You are reclusing
Yes.
yourself. It's really difficult to navigate past that, but once you get used to doing it, right, more and more and more, it gets
Mhm.
easier to adapt, right? It gets
Becomes
easier
old
to
hat.
catch your yeah, it gets easier to catch yourself as you do that. That way you don't fall
Yep.
back into that old process. Yeah.
Well, and then before you know it, you're not even slipping back and you're just going forward, and you don't even like, oh, you might look back and say, oh, look what I did. Oh yeah, pat on the back.
Right. Right. It's interesting because I feel like we almost kind of answered this question too, but my other question was, what has been the most difficult thing that you've had to let go of over the past 8 years? I mean, I think both of us have let go of this need to please everybody all the time. It's
That was a
still
big thing.
struggle
I mean,
sometimes.
yep, me too. The my biggest struggle was retiring. And because of the circumstances that I had to retire with, um, it made me doubt who I was. And it made me doubt my ability to lead. And it made me doubt that, was I good enough? Um, it made me feel that I was a failure, that I let my people down, and I let my community down. And so that was a big struggle for me. That was probably the biggest struggle out of the whole 8 years, that I had to go through. I mean, I just lost my former husband in March, and he was my life for many years.
Yeah.
Um, so even though we were not together for a very long time, he was still a part of my life. I resonated with his way of being. And that's another, I mean, you don't even think about those things. If you're separated for, shoot, we got a divorce in 98. So that was a long time, but during that process, I still resonated with some of the things that he had stated and taught me and stuff like that. But now it's totally different. So you have two losses in there. You have a loss of a former husband, you have a loss of your job, or retirement from your job. Is now it's like, okay, what do I do? What do I resonate with? What do I go? And then my within the last several weeks, I have gone back into my spirituality. That is my passion. That's what made me happy. That's where I
Mm.
thrived.
Mhm.
My challenge with that is, um, to not fear putting myself out there. I have to let my light shine.
Mhm.
And by doing so, it helps other people, or will help other people as well, along with myself.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting because I feel like over the past couple of years, you've been taking leaps and bounds when it comes to putting yourself out there, especially in ways that I know that you used to feel uncomfortable about, and with like the newer
mhm,
ventures that you've been doing, right?
mhm.
Which I think is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. But I have to say, and this is like an old cliche, is when you get older, you really don't care what people think anymore.
I mean, that's gotta
So
be
I'm
a
getting to the
refreshing thing.
yeah, well, it kinda is. It's like, "Oh, well, if you don't like it, okay." Don't do I worry about that sometimes? Yes, I do. But, um, I'm getting to where that I need to be me. Everyone else is who they are, or most of them are who they are, and do what they wanna do and say what they wanna say. But, I've always been the type of like, "Oh, I better be quiet. I don't wanna rock the boat because 'cause I'm a harmonizer."
Yeah,
Um, and now it's my time. It is now my time, and I have things I wanna say and have things that I want to help people to understand and
yeah.
maybe even teach, who knows? I've always been a teacher in spirituality. I
Oh,
may go
yeah.
back to doing that too.
Yeah,
It
you've
was fun.
always been well, and also, like, I know that you've wanted to, like, write. I know that you've wanted to do so many different things, and I guess sometimes the pathways that wind in life tend to remind us that, like, "Oh, these are still things that we're passionate about. Maybe
Mhm.
now it's time to actually do them," right?
Right.
Maybe now is the perfect moment and the perfect time to pursue that type of thing.
Yep.
So now okay, so when as everyone's listening to this right now, it's 2024. We're actually recording this in late 2023. Um, so I guess Brenda, like in 2024, what do you feel is on your horizon?
What I feel is on my horizon is definitely to continue to grow in my spirituality because there's so much to learn. And my biggest undertaking, and it just started just a little bit ago, is to find a common ground between spirituality and religion.
Mhm,
So, and I want to be able to communicate with people who are religious, because they seem to always say, "Well, you don't believe in God," and that's furthest from the truth. But I hadn't figured out, and still in the process of figuring out how to bring it across to individuals that God is much more than what we think He is. And
mhm,
you cannot put Him in a box. I mean, you can try, and people have, but certain aspects of it will still be prominent. And I want to be able to balance both of those. So that is where I'm going with all this stuff. And I also want to go out in 2024 is to start some of my spiritual readings or whatever it is that you want to call it, consultations. We'll just say it that way, consultations, because those were very helpful for people. And I have shut that avenue off, or had shut that avenue off for quite some time, and I think it has definitely taken a toll on me, and I need to let that energy flow and
mhm.
be who I really am, and that is a child of God.
Yeah.
We all are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I think that's important because again, it's kind of bringing you back to that path that like you used to be on that you really were passionate about, right? I know, like for
Right.
me, I think for me, this is probably going to be one of my journeys every year is continuing to find a balance between work life and creative life and
Mhm.
to remember that just because I have a very busy work life does not mean that I should minimize. Here we go back to the minimization again. That I don't need to minimize my creative life because that is just as important despite the whole commercialization component. And we're going to actually have an entire episode in 2024 where we talk about work life balance. So we'll be talking
Okay.
about that quite a bit at that time, but um I would say that that's on my horizon, continuing to perfect that balance that I have. Do you have any New Year's resolutions specifically?
Um, no, and the reason is New Year's resolution seems to fall away. I do have some goals,
What are your New
you
Year's
know.
goals?
Well, definitely one of my New Year's goals is to get back into a spiritual routine. okay, and be more disciplined on things that I need to be more disciplined on, and to be more organized, and to get rid of some of the clutter that I've actually not been able to do because I because I was working so hard. And yeah, but spirituality is number one. That
Yeah.
was my passion. You know, most people, they don't know what their passion is. And that was always my passion. That brought me happiness and stuff like that. So that's, goals, and maybe some traveling this year too. At least more than
Oh,
I have been anyways.
yeah. I think for me, well, one, I really want to get back into like an exercise routine because like it
Mm,
does so much for my mental health. Like to just and it I don't want to like look like a Greek god or anything that because that's
right.
never happened to
I
me.
don't know. I think it looked pretty good as Greek God.
Oh, um, but I really think that like if I can create a routine in that area, like that, it's gonna make me feel so much better throughout 2024. I know like 2024, I'm really gonna focus a lot on gardening because like I think throughout 2023, we did very well with like our gardening thing, and I think we're gonna amp it up in 2024 because that it also is a creative outlet for me too. And well, obviously, this is gonna be one of our goals for 2024, right? Churning out 12 episodes. So just to let
Yes.
everybody know we're going to be doing at least one episode a month, and we're only doing one episode a month because like with our schedules we feel that that is the best way to go. That way it doesn't create too much pressure on ourselves with our other outlets and stuff like that, right? But I think that it feels like we've just regained what we've had all those years, and it's just going to keep going and going and going, and it feels good.
Right. Right. So there's so much out there. Another one of my goals is to start eating healthier. I was there once a couple years ago now, but and I felt better. So that is another major goal actually.
Yeah,
But no, with Universal Journeys, I'm going to be a little selfish here. Okay.
be
I
selfish
need it.
with
I need this.
it.
And I know that once we get going, I'm sure other people too will like, I need this too.
Absolutely. And I in a way I need it too. Like I again I've missed you.
I
I've
missed you
really
too.
missed you. And I just anytime that we're able like I just love sitting down and talking about deep stuff with you because it feels good to be able to do that because I feel like we are very deep analytical
Mhm.
thinkers. We're always looking at the connections of different things in life, and those are different intersections that I think a lot of people may not always feel confident examining, right? So
Right.
if there's any takeaway that I would hope that people would get from us resuming this, it's the fact that it's okay to look at those intersections. It's okay to assess who you are. It's okay to examine yourself. It's okay to grow. It's okay to confront like those fears that we might be worried about, right? So,
Right.
ah,
Absolutely.
so, Brenda, do you want to conclude us with our slogan? Because I've not heard it come out of you in so many years.
Well, I don't even know if I have it, to tell you the truth.
Just the follow your heart one.
Oh, so my saying is follow your heart, for only you know which path is right for you. God bless.
We love you all, and we will see you on the flip side. Bye.
Bye.